Welcome to Powerboat Talk, the podcast where we talk everything performance boats with your host, Joe Rode.
Before we get started today, I wanted to give a quick shout out to some companies that are helping to support our fast boat community. This episode is brought to you by SoCal Jet Boats, one of the original hot boat forums and still a great resource of performance boating information. SoCal Jet Boats has created a fantastic selection of hot boat apparel and has something for everybody. They're also great supporters of boat racing, and you can find them at all ADBA and NJBA drag boat races. You can also join the folks from SoCal Jet Boats on one of the stops on their 2026 Colorado River Summer Tour and enjoy a great weekend on the river with fellow performance boaters. You can find SoCal Jet Boats on Instagram and Facebook or online at socaljetboats.com. This episode is sponsored by West Coast River Outlaws. West Coast River Outlaws is a fast-growing media and marine services company built around supporting people who love fast boats. They create epic content and run an online retail hub. And they've also officially opened their repair and service shop in Arlington, Texas. Whether you need a new boat, help with a project, or action shots on the water, connect with them. You can find West Coast River Outlaws on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at WCRO Media or online at westcoastriveroutlaws.com. Welcome to Powerboat Talk. Today I've got a guy that has been behind the scenes for a while, so a lot of you guys won't know him, but this guy is one of the icons in the marine industry, and he's guaranteed probably something you have in your boat. If you've got a performance boat, it can be attributed to Joe Zelinski. Joe is one of the original founders of Custom Marine Incorporated, CMI headers.
Correct.
And yeah, so I've been friends with Joe for a long time. Back in the early 90s when I was at Rex Marine, we cut a deal and we sold a lot of CMIs, and I spent some time with Joe and his partner at the time. Back in Miami. So Joe's got some really interesting stuff to say. So Joe, thanks. I know it's been a long time coming, but I appreciate you getting on with me. People are going to enjoy this.
Thanks for having me.
So Joe, I always like to kind of start what's going on. You've been retired for a while. You guys sold CMI years ago. You've been retired, but you're an engineer and your engineer brain never rests. So I know every time I talk to you, you got something new you're working on or another new boat you're thinking about buying. So what's on your plate today?
Yeah, I'm like 30 minutes away from another project. It's like the header systems. They never quit clocking in your brain until you always think, oh, there's a little bit better way to do it. And you always tried to think of that while you were working at it, but things just don't click sometimes. And anyway, just looking at what always tore themselves up. It's saltwater and high temperatures don't really mix very well with exhaust gases, and things kind of independent of the alloy, you can have problems. So kind of thinking about that all the time and how the different stuff came apart over time, and whether it's the collector or the attachment flange. I think we kind of answered the tubes in between the two. Always, whenever there was a cost reduction run at Merck or one of our other customers, that always pointed to the collector and the head flange and that distribution tube and all that stuff. That was kind of like if you had a thermal imaging camera and could set it to the money setting, those areas would glow red on that header, so that was always what you were working on. Towards the end of my tenure at Custom Marine, after I sold it, I was working on and just got the patent for a collector that was completely removable, that would attach with O-rings and a couple of fasteners. And we were working on that and had it out on a little dyno that we had running the crap right out of it. And we'd purposely turn the water off to the headers and get them just glowing red, just hot, no water in them, and just keep running them. And those O-rings would smoke themselves out, and then we'd pour the water back to them. So you'd have this red hot header and turn the water back on. It was kind of fun just screwing with this kind of stuff. And I was amazed at how it held up. And we'd pressure check them after stuff like that. The O-rings would be smoked, but they'd melt in a way that would seal them
funny.
to the tubes. And, I'd like, the hell, man, this is pretty cool. If you wanted to count on that, you could never get it to work that way. And
Right.
we did it several times and could never quite come up with how to do the head flange. That distribution tube was always expensive to make, a lot of hand welding and stuff. And we put a lot of stuff in robots, but TIG welding and robots just never really went together yet. And it wasn't probably a year and a half or so after I got canned, like looking at some stuff that's in my shop, and I'm looking at an adapter flange on a small block Chevy, the old where they had the Siamese ports in the center.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Let's just layer the head flange and make a passage in the center for the water and put it in tubes like we do the same thing with the collector that we've been using. That collector's probably sitting on a shelf in my old office or in a closet right now, and nobody knows what it is. And looked at it, and I put some samples together in my little shop and could finally make a complete header that you could assemble it from pieces and O-rings and bolts, and it looked just like the standard Mercury sweeper header, had made it to make a replacement for it, but you could wreck apart and replace one header tube, whereas with the way the headers were welded together on so many separate welding steps in the assembly, taking it apart was just a act of Congress. You could do it if you ground everything by hand and took one part out at a time, but it was cheaper to make a complete new header.
Mm-hmm. Plus producing all those individual pieces, right? Isn't it more you just produce a million of each piece, and then so your cost is way down.
Yeah, and it some of the stuff would have been some fairly intricate castings, but with the state of investment casts in stainless or even to go to brass or bronze or something like that, you could get the cost back down on it. But you kind of needed a juggernaut like CMI with the expensive machinery to build all that. And it doesn't really pay for a guy in a kind of a moderate barn playing around with some equipment that he collected over the years, Yeah. And
but keeps your brain working, right? And and also you can say you did it.
Yeah. And I called one of my old bosses there and just no interest in it, So I'm like, okay, whatever, and just go on with life. And I'm not thinking about pushing all my chips back in that corner again and going into the header business. But with all the, stern drives seem to have fell out of favor again for probably the third time since I've been in business. And, there was a story at Stillwater one time when I was there that the current president of Mercruiser would give tours out of the office door. He'd stop by the lunchroom and point at the Coke machine, and he goes, "That machine makes more profits than Outboards does." Right? That was one of the running jokes at the time. Well, that changed now, but
yeah. And the funny thing is, I read that book about Kiekhaefer, and he just he pushed outboards. He hated stern drives to the point where he lost the stern drive deal and had to kind of backhandedly get it. But it's funny how you're right, it's cyclical, right?
It's a cycle, and here I go. I lost where we were heading with this one. Anyway, I was looking at that header and then working on a few other things. It's nice to be retired now and just kind of go and work on whatever interests you at the time. It collects a lot of boxes of parts that you put a label on and put up on a shelf, never to be coming down again. Someday my kids are going to be going through that and go, "What the hell was wrong with them?"
But you know what? Yeah, if it brings you joy, I got those old boxes too. Like the old magazines. I'll just sit down with a box. I'm like, you know what? I don't care. I'm never gonna throw these out. I like just going through them. Same with that. So Joe, then so did you grow up around boating? How did you get the boat bug?
Right out of the hopper. I think it was we lived on the river in Menasha, and as a little kid, you couldn't go near the river unless you knew how to had a certain level at the community pool, certain swimming ability, and that never kept me from walking back there and trying toys in the river and stuff, and I'd get my ass paddled. And but my dad was always working on boats. He had a plumbing business and mechanical contracting, home building stuff, and that. And the yard looked like a junkyard sometimes. Well, anyway, my dad there were 2 railroad tracks and parts of an old train car that he built a cabin cruiser on. And I remember this when I was young because there'd be boats running down the river and stuff. And I'd always oh, man, why don't you get one of those faster ones instead of building this cabin cruiser stuff? As a little kid, I'm thinking that, how fast would this go? How could we make this go? And he was, I don't know at what age, but he pointed out to me on one of the engines he was working on, whatever he could get out of a junkyard, Oh, it's hard to turn them. You can use a car engine in a boat, but the exhaust manifolds are so expensive. And he's telling me why. And I'm like, man, you just don't know what clicks in your head and sticks with you from a kid on. And Menasha, the city we were living in at the time, had a lot, maybe the proximity to Mercury or what was going on, but at one time, there were more APBA racing members in Menasha, Wisconsin than any other city in the country. And it was just amazing. You put together these old groups, and there was a race down the street all the time at one of the city parks, and it was a pretty big deal in the town. And I think that's how more kids got involved in it. Their parents were in, and pretty soon, what are you going to do? I want to race boats, and as a little kid, I couldn't go down there yet. It was a few blocks from the house, and I don't even remember the age, but it was pretty small, and I could bug the hell out of my old man until he finally said, okay, we're going down there. And we go down there, and he's introducing him to his nephew or a cousin or something that were racing boats. And it was one of the guys had an old 4-cylinder Quincy Mercury on a hydro and a lot of D gas motors and stuff on them. And as a kid, I was just enamored by that stuff. And he's introducing me to this guy, and I'm watching him and that stuff. And don't get near anything, okay, and standing back. And then they raced for 2 days on Saturday and Sunday. Sunday after we were back at home, and I could hear those motors running down the street. I want to go, and he goes, get on your bike and go there. You can do it alone now, So, but that went every year until I could, through all the different boats. I was working at about 12 years old, picked up an old Boston Whaler, a 13-footer with a 30-horse Evinrude on it, and just whaled that boat senseless. It was just always broken, and working on it and trying to keep that thing running. And one time I couldn't get it started, and a bunch of screwdrivers and a couple of pipe wrenches got the nut off the top of the flywheel, and prying on it and pounding on the top of the crank, got it off, and and the points seemed burned in it. And I take one part out of it, and I get on the bike, and I ride down to one Johnson dealer, and I said, can I buy a set of these? And it'd be this much. Okay, there's another Evinrude dealer about 4 miles from here. Get back on the bike and see if the price is any better. I went up to this guy, and I had just one side of the points, and I go, could I buy this? He goes, you want to buy that? You know where that goes? And I go, yeah. And this guy's talking to me, and you got that out yourself? And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, if you'd come here and work part-time, I'll give you those parts.
Wow.
That was and I had to run back. I bought the set of points, and I went back. The guy thought it was different, that I just wanted to buy half. And I said, that's the only half that looks really bad. And go back, and my dad had to go out there and go meet the guy and talk to him and that stuff. There weren't that many weirdos then, but, some
you never know, right?
Out your shop. But anyway, worked there for quite a while as a kid, and used up a lot of parts, and it was always interesting.
Wow.
Learned quite a bit about outboards, and it turned out he had a bunch of race engines, and his kid Marty was racing for him, and it was when I finally got out there, they were getting rid of all their Mercuries and buying German Koenig engines. And he asked if I'd go along and pit for him and help him in the pits. And I'm like, oh, man, that's something else. So it was traveling around the Midwest. We'd race down in Illinois at Depew and through a couple of places in Minnesota, but mostly around Wisconsin and pro races. And then I started roping the boats for him for being a starter when as a kid, and just got to know all of them. And that was how the summers were spent, working at that dealership and going to the races. So it just kind of all rolls together, and you just had a great time for a while.
Wow, that's awesome. What a great stroke of luck, right? But starts with a kid trying to take care of his own stuff and figure out how to fix it, right?
Yeah, and then get a job doing it. And
yeah,
I always pretty much, I sucked at school. I just had no interest in it, and just kind of pulled through it. In second grade, I've got a report card yet from a Catholic nun that said I got the shit beat out of my hands all the time with the ruler and stuff. But anyway, I've got a report card that says on it, and the last semester or last half of second grade, Joe is placed in third grade. If he doesn't straighten his act out in the first 2 weeks, he's going to have to repeat the second grade. And down at the bottom, it says, maybe retarded.
No, it doesn't. You literally have that still.
And I bring this report card home and the first thing I want to do is just hand that stuff to my mom, get outside and go do something, tear something apart or something. All of a sudden, my dad's back, the plumbing truck, which was a station wagon and stuff. Joe, come in here. And now what did I do? And they had the kitchen chair out, and this is early 60s kitchen chair, and my dad goes out to the truck, gets his flashlight and stuff, and there's 3 of these chairs, and my mom and dad sitting across from me, and I said, sit down in that chair. And he's got the flashlight on my face. They're looking at each other. I don't think he's retarded. There goes, the stigmatization right away following you. And do we have to take them someplace or what? And I'm like, well, I don't know what they're talking about. I just want to get back out to the sandbox or wherever I am. That stuff. And I didn't even think of that again until my mom gave me all those report cards one time. And I go, there's where the problem is.
Wow. Well, thank God that diagnosis didn't
might be true yet.
No, I don't know, dude. Yeah. So you're bad at school, but now you're basically an engineer, right? So how did you get your engineering chops? So you must have been good enough to figure that out.
Just from the home thing, at 12, I wasn't given that whaler. I was working as if you can shovel, you can be a plumber. And I remember my dad taking me we'd build a couple of spec homes, or he would, every year, and in between plumbing work and that stuff. And you'd pretty much shovel gravel, and there were no tractors at that time. There'd be a dump truck load of gravel in the driveway of this house you're building, and a wheelbarrow and a shovel, and he'd say, I want 2 feet of gravel all the way around this house on top of that drain tile. That's your job for the summer. And I'm like, oh man, and just sit there shoveling and wheelbarrowing all day. So anyway, that's how I bought the whaler. I still remember it was $650 for a boat and a trailer, and I'm glad I don't own it anymore. I'd be restoring it or something now. And then that led to another time. One time my dad came back from work, and I couldn't get all the screws out of the side water jacket on it, and I took the top ones out and pried it open to see if I could see the exhaust in it, because I remembered the race boats all ran pipes out the side. Can I put these on my whaler? And took it off and couldn't get it back on. And he comes back, and we glued it up with some epoxy and a little piece of copper and bolted it back on and ran that thing for the rest of the summer. But always taking something off of it, kind of try to see how it works. And the boats got a little bit better over the years as I got older. The Hydrostreams were pretty popular and some of that stuff. I had a Switzer for a while.
Oh, wow.
They never, I was older then, just made it through high school. I had a counselor pull me in just before graduation, and you're not going to graduate. I'm like, yeah, okay, and he goes, well, we figured out a way you could get some extra credits to get your thing up, get enough credits for graduation, and we're going to move some of your classes around, and then you're going to take a beginner's woodworking class over the noon hour and then work with your dad in the afternoon, and we'll give you enough credits to graduate from high school. Yeah, okay, whatever. So I'm in this beginner's woodworking class where they're teaching you not to saw your fingers off in the table saw and all that kind of stuff. And I was already doing trim finish work.
Yeah.
This is at 17 years old in these houses and stuff, and finally get through all the safety stuff in the class. The teacher was a pretty cool guy, and he goes, okay, you can pick this project. I picked the simplest one, some gun cabinet or something, and then you had to get all this stack of wood and turn it into a gun cabinet. And you can take them home on the weekends to work on them if you want to sand them or whatever. Had a joiner, and my dad had a joiner, a table saw, and a couple other things, and bring it back that Monday finished. And he goes, what the hell did you just do? You did this? And I said, yeah. Well, how did you do this? You need that different tool. Did it all on the table, so I just set it right and that stuff. And he goes, what are you doing in this class? And I just needed the 3 credits, and we're building houses. That's what I do all afternoon. Oh, okay. And saw him at a local bar here once, way later in the whole CMI thing. And he goes, what are you doing now? And I've got that header shop or that fabrication shop. Could I see that? He wanted to go over and see what I was doing. Yeah. It was kind of a cool story,
Yeah, yeah.
So that was a plumber for a while, but once you plumb one new house, you look at it, you plumb them all. It's just easily bored. Did some welding for a while, and then I bought a couple of cars, and I was fixing them up, and ended up buying my own floor jack and a wire feed welder and some other stuff. And I'm doing this out in the driveway and fixing rust holes, being up here in Wisconsin, and guys driving by, and you want to come and work at the body shop? It was a Chevy dealership, and yeah. What do you pay? And he goes, well, we'll start you out on hourly. And I'm over there screwing around and finally put me on rate. And I was looking at my checks, and I'm making some pretty serious money. And what are you going to do? Well, let's buy a race boat. So I bought a...
The way to get rid of any savings account, right?
Yeah. You got to live on zero, And there was some time lapsed in between that, but there was this 3-point tunnel boat, a kind of a copy of a Molinari boat for Mod 50. And I'll buy that. Got in it, drove it around. It had a Mercury 3-cylinder on it. And I don't know exactly, some XS motor, I think, at the time. And man, this is slow. I got to get something better than this. Well, I make other boats. And I looked at some of the stuff that he was doing. And there were some guys that worked at Mercury that were buying boats from him at the time. And okay, I'll order one of them. I've got enough cash for that. And raced that for a while. And those guys that worked at Mercury kind of were watching me. And it's got to be, carburetors are too small. So I find 3 old 44 McCuneys, and I figured out a way to get them mounted on the front of this motor. Not knowing really what I was doing, I figured you'd have to raise the compression some, but no way to do it with that engine. And just screwing around and didn't know how to weld aluminum good enough to just make the domes of the pistons a little higher or something. But goofing around with that, and that guy from Mercury sees these McCuneys on that thing, and at one of the races, and he like, you did all this stuff and made this stuff. He goes, you ever think about building parts and not racing them yourself? I crashed a few times after that, and a few broken ribs and pretty sore. You'd watch the guys go around the corner with a tunnel boat and really fast, blindingly fast down the straights, set the front end of the boat, turn it around one pin and back out of the thing. And you do it just a little bit too hard and you're going out the side of the boat. And I think I did that twice and starting to rethink my life. And blew it over once at his, wow. They have a shop on the water in Oshkosh, and blew it over at wide open on that thing. And he just thought I had a pair of ankle high work boots on. I did it right after work. We were testing there. He said, put the motor back to stock and we'll get it running right that way. And then you can start modifying it. And okay, testing at his place, blew it right over and just kind of knocked senseless. The water pressure tore one of them boots off my foot, and
wow.
I had a crash vest on and all the helmet and stuff, but came up when the boat was upside down and there was little pieces of wood floating around all over the place. I'm thinking, man, this is rough. And anyway, they got me out of the water, got me into a shower, a cold shower, I guess, because they thought I'd be knocked a little goofy for a while. And I'm sitting in that shower just kind of coming to and heard my boat started and stuff. And I get up and still had my life jacket on and stuff and go out there and, we got some dry clothes for you and stuff. They must have been used to people crashing in their backyard.
Fishing them out and yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, long story. Okay. I tried getting jobs at Mercury, tried getting jobs at all kinds of places that would maybe pay me and keep up with my hobbies. But that never seemed to work out. And I thought, man, I'm working at that body shop and I had to do something different about living. So I went and took the placement test for college, and it proved that I barely got out of high school, but I had to start over. So I thought I'd start taking a couple of math classes, and that was my downfall all the time, and actually did pretty well. And I'm like, what's different now about it? But it worked on, and I ended up getting through and getting a bachelor's degree. And
wow.
It had to do high school over, pretty much. Had to start from some 091 classes all the way up. But once you get about a year and a half or so into it, and I had to move away for school for a while, and the summers kind of got to know a couple of guys with some engine shops up here and had to do work credits or co-oping. And they had a few stock cars that they ran around the Midwest. And he goes, well, if you'd work for me on that, I'll cover your hotel rooms, your beer, and your meals, and your entry. I'm like, hey, what could go wrong? I'm not making any money, but I might have some fun. So we did that for a few summers. And then I was kind of working on the side just after school and in a fab shop, and started goofing around with skipping the whole thing. Got hired right out of school. The first job that I got, I had a couple of offers, nothing really good, but I got a call back from Kiekhaefer Aeromarine down in Fond du Lac, and it was like the original starter, what Carl started after he got out of Mercury, and went down there, met a lot of cool people, and man, just the history in that building was unbelievable. And working there and dealing with a lot of the corporate stuff, I'm guessing I wasn't a stellar employee anyway. So
now did Carl was still Carl
He
still
was
owned it at the
gone
time?
then already.
Okay, so Fred was doing it. Okay.
running it, and pretty interesting place. A lot of history there. A lot of old engines still laying
Yeah.
around, and
Really? Yeah.
a lot of stuff going on. We did propellers and stuff. I was speccing propellers for a lot of different boats at the time, and it was pretty much horsepower to weight ratio, some other data that you'd put into the thing, and we made a version of the 3-Speedmaster there when I was working there. So you had your choice of a lot of different gear ratios for them. And at that time, their 29 pitch props were like the deal to have for some of the offshore stuff. And that's generally their most efficient one running blade at the time. And you just take the horsepower to weight ratio, try to get you in that area where you could run that 29 or that 30.
The gear ratio. Yeah.
Yeah. And that generally worked out pretty good. Got to know just by phone, like George Morales running the Mercruiser Special, and a few people would go to the Miami Boat Show and that stuff and have to work that and meet all the people that would come into that booth. That was like a history lesson for me. But it's kind of interesting, Joe. You get to know these people just at that point in time, and you just introduced to who they are. I wasn't going to any of the races then at that time, and okay, yeah, this is this person or that person. And it isn't until you sit back and you look at some of the history books on offshore racing or tunnel boat racing, that's the guy I knew when he was 50. Instead, here's what he was doing and that stuff. It's just so interesting. And one of them was I got to know. We were racing with doing some stuff for the Don Q boats, the Suralis boats, and crew chief at the time and stuff, and whatever it was later at Custom Marine, I had to go down to Lake X to meet a guy from High Perf down there and test some stuff that we were doing on some exhaust, and got the Lake X a little early and come in there, and the guy that was running the place after Schwebe was out of it said, well, he's not here yet. I asked for the guy I was supposed to meet from High Perf there, and he goes, I met you somewhere, and he was the box of keys is over there. Go look down on the dock and see if there's anything you want to play around with.
Oh my God.
And I sat back and I go, man, I died and went to heaven. I go to the key box and I had to go down on the dock, and I'm like, what's it going to be? And
wow.
Check out this fountain, and we'll go out rupping around on Lake X with it until the guy shows up that I'm supposed to be with. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm actually doing this,
Yeah. Wow. And you get a lot of money to sell passes for that, right?
Yeah. And I find out later that was John Sherlock, he was the crew chief for the Don Q boat, but then he was kind of overseeing Lake X for a while, and he's the guy that gave me them keys, and I'm like, man, I owe him a thanks,
Yeah, that's a title of a book right there, Joe, the day I got the keys to Lake X.
Yeah, pick one. I wish I had that here in my backyard.
Yeah. So back to Kiekhaefer, were they still doing the race motors at that time, or had they gotten out of the race motors?
They were all. And it was always explained to us that we were doing work for OMC and work for Mercury. We did a lot of machining for both companies. I think it was gear cases for some of the OMC outboards, and I don't know if they were into the stern drives then. And for Mercury, I think we were doing the 3-Speedmaster lowers and some of the other stuff, and maybe some of the gears and that. And he said, we're kind of a small person splotching around in between the footsteps of the giants, and we can't step in the way of either one of them. And it was explained that way. And, the throttles, the trim tabs, propellers, we did some gear case or some 3-Speedmaster parts, but we had to buy a lot of the parts from Mercury to build those. And I was there up until the time when they just started working on the 6. And then it was still drafting boards and pencil and paper that they were drawing the 6 out with. They hired a guy back that worked for them at one time, Larry Losey. Mm-hmm. And he was like the the guy for stern drives and at the time, and they designed 6 there.
Like, were you privy? Did you know that was going on? Because they kept it pretty secret, right?
Yeah, I knew it was going on, but I was I've got a habit, Joe, of only working at a place or for anybody for about 2 years. And by then they usually have had enough of me. And I was at that 2-year mark with Kiekhaefer, and you'd be walking around in the plant working on something, and you'd hear the speaker go off, everybody with a set of khakis on and a company golf shirt up to the room with the brown table, and you knew it was some big meeting or something, and head up there and they're talking about something, and we've got to come up with some new products. And we had some of the old header tubes from when Carl had the race engines, those Champion Maker motors, and we had enough parts to put together 2 more of those motors, and they had them sold to somebody, but they had to put those headers together, and they're kind of working on them, and I got to know the guy that was welding them and talking to him, and in one of those meetings I said, we should make headers. We could do that here, and we could step this up a little bit, change the way the tubes are put together and that. And Fred pointed across that table at me. He goes, Zelinski, you want to build headers, you quit and go build those some by your own, And, okay.
Fred had a lot of good ideas, didn't he?
Yeah, it might have still had a touch of something with my head. So I'm going to go make headers and made some other little parts and stuff out of my basement of my house I was living in. And one that started with, like steam fittings. Part of the problem with them was thinning in the back wall of the bends, and bending the tube inside of a tube was kind of problematic because of the way the inner tube would craze and the metallurgy of it all stuff I learned in that little bit of college that I was in. And okay, let's just study nickel metallurgy a little bit harder and work on that, and come up with some theories on the different alloys and that stuff that we could use, and built a half of a set of 2 different types of headers, transom jack, some trim indicators, and a bunch of stuff, and got a membership in NMMA and set up a booth to go show in the Chicago IMTEC show when that was something once, and had a 10x10 booth there and set it up.
And this, you did all this on your own. This was after you left Kiekhaefer. Wow.
Yeah, I had this idea on how to put the headers together, and some guy thought, well, that might work. Could you go and buy a bunch of the stuff? I'll pay for it, but we're looking for a product here at a metal tubing fab shop. And I did that, and I went and had a guy that was working for him in this big shop doing some of the welding for me, and got talking to him. And he was a pipe fitter by trade, and they were working on some of the nuclear plants in the area in Point Beach and a lot of the Budweiser breweries, and really good welder. And got talking to him, and turns out he's from a town next to me, and we still hang out together. He kind of came and welded for me at night and stuff, put these samples together, and had that 10x10 booth, just not knowing what's going to happen. And the first day there, it was just mayhem. There was so many people packed. We were down in the basement of the convention center, and I swear it was right next to the boiler room. It was so damn hot in there, and had a line coming into the booth. It was cool. That was the first time I met Jake Gilbreth and some of the people, and Jake's explaining to me how I'm making the headers, and I'm like, who is this guy? And later on, that's Gilbreth, and that's cool. And a lot of the people that I worked with at Kiekhaefer came down, but you think you hit it then, but there's a long time between them couple of prototypes. And when you're finally hitting stride building headers, you're building a few here and a few there. And you just gradually do that improvements that you see. I think the first couple of sets of headers went to some guy's race boat, and then we did a couple of pleasure boats. And one day we got a call from Rick Lamour at Innovation, and he was doing a project for the military, and he was going to try everybody's headers on it. And he had Stellings, he had us build him a set, of course not paying for them, and just about everybody that could be on it. And then they were going to test them on some of these military engines. And somehow we ended up winning that. And it was a pretty good, you get these smaller orders, and the Navy by any stretch wasn't a small order, but it just all builds up. You don't really see when you had a company, but you build a few sets here and there, and then a few more, and then you'd get a little bit better deal on the tubing or find some different way to make something. You just look at all the changes over time. One day we were in this crappy building that we bought for like $70,000, and we had our first chance at 3-phase power where we could run some of the other machines we were acquiring, and in there, and the guy that was working the phones, hey, some guys, or the woman working up in the front was there in what we called an office. It was part of a trailer out there, and some guy's calling, and he's got to, I think you got to talk to him, and it's from McLaren. And I go, McLaren, no, that isn't gonna. And I take this call, and he's talking about doing small block headers, but he wants to put steps in them, and he's talking real complicated about how he wants these headers, two different steps, 3 different size tubing, and the primary lengths of this header, this small block header. He goes, that's something you think you can do? Absolutely. Wouldn't have a clue how it was going to get this done. And get your name and that stuff, and it's Mike DeAnnabelle. He was working for McLaren, and he explains to me that they got a inquiry for a sheik in Dubai building, I'm guessing 14 or 18 32 skaters for M-class for his nephews. And each boat's going to have 2 engines, and then they're going to have 2 sets of spares for each boat, and they want headers on all of them. And you think, how am I going to do this? And that's the first phone conversation with Mike DeAnnabelle, and he was at McLaren, and then something happened there. They said, we don't want to get into this. You start your own engine company. So that was the start of Sterling,
yeah.
Engines. As far as I know, I was going to call him and go over this story before I talked to you, but it's only been a year or something since we started talking about this.
Yeah.
A chance to talk to him about it.
It's so funny. I was just talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and we were talking about, that's the entrepreneur that makes it, is the guy that says, I'll get the business and I'll figure out how to do it. Right. But I am not going to say no to the business if I think I can do it. So that's awesome.
You couldn't. And that those different sizes and bends just weren't available. And I had a guy working for me then that used to work at that race car shop that did the drag cars and the chassis work and stuff. And he took a stainless steel big ball bearing and made a little thing with a little hydraulic ram on it. And he pushed that ball bearing through those 90-degree fittings.
Yeah.
It was like a snake swallowing a rat. It just got bigger. And I'm like, cool, this is going to work out. Right. We made all those fittings and ended up in being the start of Victory Team. And it was just over the years, we did so much work for Victory Team and the different engines and stuff that they were doing. It was mostly Sterlings or Mercs, for a long time. And
now with Victory, you had the advantage too that you were probably learning on somebody else's paycheck too, right?
Oh yeah. They were great to work with. But it was all U.S. people over there.
US guys, right?
Randy Chisholm and just a whole list of the people around here, the guy that was spraying the gel coat for Eliminator at the time moved over there, and
Really?
all kinds of.
Yeah.
I can't even think. I wrote down a list of all before this thing of all the names of the people, and I skipped the whole victory team thing. I didn't need to put the names down.
Yeah.
But
So I want to go back though. So that first time when you went to IMTEC, by the way, IMTEC used to be the shit, right? That was the show.
Yeah, that was it.
What year was that? Do you remember?
Would have been like 89.
Okay.
Maybe earlier or later.
I think it would be earlier, Joe, because let me think. No, you maybe because I think we were doing business with you in the late 90s, I think. And you guys, and you had it going. It was no, you were no bullshit then, because we were buying stuff like pallets.
One short header and one tall one, and that's all I had. Is one side of it is all I could afford to put together.
Now, when you went into the thing with innovation, where he was, you were basically, bidding on this military job. I mean, how confident were you? Confident your stuff was the best? Had you really looked at the other guy's stuff? And
that guy that was welding for me at the time, I'd always have him coming in, and I'd pay him some money for coming in and welding after his shift and that stuff, wherever he had to work. But I'd always say, "Do you want some more money?" And he goes, "Nah, when you get that big order, you owe me a steak and a lobster out at some restaurant." And Joe, you never know when that big order came. It was always a step and a step and a step. And like the first Mercury order was probably, it ended up being that Navy thing was pretty out there that Lemoore had at innovation. And of course, Mercury's going to go after it. And by that time, we were sole source for the exhaust for it. And Mercury had to order the headers from us for the trial motors for the Navy that they put in. And, it's like when any business goes through a cycle, when it's at the low end of it, you're looking for all the work you can do. So Mercury,
you don't say no to anything. Right?
And they tried what they called then at the time was some version of their Bulldog engine, I think a 540 cubic inch thing, and they were going to sell it to the Navy. And I'm guessing it didn't turn out very well, but we did get the chance to sell them 6 or 7 sets of headers, and
that was your first deal with Mercury?
Pretty much, yeah. We kept trying, and it just not real a lot of interest in something that hasn't been trialed in that. But that sort of pushed it over the top a little bit. We got some little builds for custom stuff from them, and then I think that 800 SC motor that they made for a little while, a supercharged engine with a couple of carburetors on the top, and that was a few sets here and there, and it just gradually built, and we were pretty stout header at the time. They had the Mercury 575 was a 540 cubic inch motor that had Stelling's headers on it. And it pretty much got dropped from the line. And we heard that it was because of header problems or exhaust issues and stuff. But they dropped it right out. And then they built that 420, 454 big head motor. And they had a cast iron exhaust on it that they made themselves. And
that was that 420. Most people don't even remember that 420, right? But that was the one with the big riser, right? It had a big flange and
iron riser on it.
Yeah.
And I was at the Miami Boat Show one time, and it almost was like a ride. There was a plane driving around up above the show with "call this number if you've got rotted out 420s."
No,
and it was
seriously.
And I go by the Mercury booth in the show, and there was the start of a class action suit. Some lawyer was there, and all these people were yelling, and it looked like. And I'm like sitting back watching this and thinking, man, I'm glad I'm not part of that.
That's so funny because just selling exhaust for all the years I did, I would just run across a set of those once in a while. I never really knew what the story was or what they were, but I remember what they were.
They were hot, hot exhaust with cast iron, and it must have looked like an Alka-Seltzer on the side of that motor for how fast they rotted out. And then they ended up putting a gill on it, and it became the 500 carb after a little while with the gill exhaust on it. And that kind of got us into fountain powerboats. They wanted to do a silent choice on it. And we started building those tops for the gill manifold for it. Marty Woodsinger was there at the time, and he was from the Wisconsin area, as was Eichert and Lamore and all them guys, all old Mercury guys that end up down in Florida or wherever and start their own businesses. That's how that Fountain was always a real good customer, right from that from that start. Different tailpipes, and when we finally got the headers, there were some issues with the gill motors or the gill exhaust in some of the boats that Mercury was on, and they were talking to us, well, we just want to replace them and we want to get these people quiet. We'll buy a set of your E-tops for it. And then that switched over to that racing class that they had with the 500 carb in. Oh. But then they had to add some weight to the boats with the CMI headers on it versus the older ones with the gills because of something that they weren't telling us about. And I'm guessing, why would they add weight to the boat?
Wow.
So it was cool. And then when they made the 500 EFI, that was our first step into the what I call
production,
the bigger production. Yeah. And that was started in one of our old buildings, and it was a little dicey at first, but we got it and everything came off fairly well. And it was in that testing, we had a test boat and we'd endurance different parts on it. And I'm screwing around and let's try a set of long tube headers on this. And it was a light boat and little 24-foot A-class boat, and with running a 500 carb in it, and just throw a set of headers on it, the long tube headers. And man, that was interesting. That thing, we could pull another
woke that thing up, huh?
And stuff, and pick that up quite a bit. And I was talking to the engineer from Merck, and he was up at our shop for something. And I said, man, we had pretty good results from these headers. And he goes, you got a set I could try? And it was gone for a while, and it was about 2-3 months later. I said, so how did that ever work out? And he goes, interesting, you should bring that up. We put those on the dyno on one of the other engines, and we decided to rework the heads a little bit. And then we tried some different camshafts, and then we are out of intake manifolds, so we opened that up a little bit. I said, so where's this heading? And he goes, we're going to launch a new motor, and that was the 525. And I'm like, oh, this is cool. This is going to work out fine. And everybody thought, a longer tube header, of course, it's way more expensive. And little did they know by that time we were kind of hitting stride, buying tubing right, and had enough automation for some of the robotics and stuff, doing some of the welds. And we started getting into our own bending, and with big carriage bending or carriage boosted benders, so that we could kind of press the tube into the dies when we were bending to control the back wall thinning and stuff. And we were messing with stuffing the tubes in one inside of another over the mandrel in the bender, and kind of perfected some ways to do that. And it was kind of working out pretty good. And that header got to the point where, that I was like shocked when we got through the accounting on it, on how economically we could really build that. Yeah, it was it was under $700 for a pair, with all of our costs in it, labor and overhead and everything like that. And at the time, we're still selling them for $2,700 a set. And yeah, cool. That's when the accountants and bankers and all the lawyers and stuff that you have by that time in that business, we had about 110 people working for us.
Oh, wow.
Picking up all these different jobs. And they just, somebody, Bob Brown, I think he was an accountant or a editor for Hotboat.
Yeah, Hotboat and Powerboat. Yeah, Bob Brown. Yeah,
we get these calls all the time from people oh, I want to buy your shop. Yeah, sure you do. Goodbye. Like that. And Bob called one time and he goes, hey, how you doing, Joe? I knew him from the hot boat parties in Miami and stuff and advertising there. And
Sure.
he just said, well, I'm called you because they figured you'd hang up on somebody from a business acquisition place. But I've got some customers that are kind of looking to buy some marine companies. And, oh, okay. They figured you wouldn't talk to anybody if they didn't know you. And, well, okay. Probably true. And then one thing led to another, and they made an offer and showed it to all those consultants that I had. And they said, yeah, you'd be pretty stupid if you didn't do this. So that was it.
Yeah. What year was that? Do you remember?
Not exactly. My wife takes care of all these times, and probably 15 years ago now.
Yeah. So now, how was? Well, let me ask you too, because did you have a partner at some point? Where was Tom?
Tom, he had a Mercruiser service franchise, and I kind of was renting the tools from him. He had a bandsaw and stuff that I needed to build the first couple of sets of headers, and that I'd work for him for cash. Or wait, I better not say that. Edit that part out. And then use his shop and rent it from him at night. And that's when I set up that 10 by 10 booth at IMTEC to start my own little gig in there. And then he kind of worked this deal to be, later on, it took him a while to do a deal to become a partner in it. And we did that for 10, 15 years. And then he wanted out, and I eventually bought him out of it again.
Oh, so he wasn't, when you sold, it was just you.
No,
he was out of it.
Long gone by that time.
Good for you. Now, I know when you sell a business, especially one that was born with your two hands, right? Like, how was that emotionally? Were you ready for that? Or was it just the money was just, you just couldn't resist?
It was interesting thing, he had to have some edit or audited financials and some other stuff going on. And I was a shop guy. I was out in the shop the whole time. And how are you with reading the financials and stuff? And I said, I go out in the shop and I count how many sets of headers are going together and assembled. And then I'd always read the check registers every week, every dime that went out of the place in this big long sheet. I had a copy of all the checks and who they went to, including all the payroll and stuff. And I got to know all the employees by name, how much they made, every different vendor, and where just about all the checks, including the little cash thing in the drawer that was used for paying some of the pizza nights and stuff.
Right.
And then I'd always make it part of my stroll by the scrap bins to see what was getting scrapped and how much I thought that was all worth. And they eventually, I had a CPA working for me as a operations manager or a CFO, and a couple of different people. I had an office in there, but I was out in the shop most of the time. We had work for Harley Davidson, that Buell motorcycle. We did all the exhausts for them. They were, at the time when they started up, they were having Vance and Hines do some header for them, and it was all pieces that looked like a piece of plumbing work with some welds on it. And we kind of straightened that out. And then we were putting that together with all kinds of pieces and then grinding the welds off and polishing all that out. It's kind of it was a Harley engine and a lot of sweeps and on that V twin cylinder thing to get the exhaust in the right spot for that race, kind of semi-race bike, and figured out a way to do it with a two-stack bender where we could put two dies in it and actually bend the whole exhaust up pretty complete. And we ended up doing pretty well with that for a while, and then Buell eventually sold it to Harley, and you can read the tea leaves on that one, how that went out. Once there's a different CEO in force at Harley, Buell is going to be gone, and what happened. But it was a pretty good customer for a while. Then we did all the mufflers for Miller Electric for all their standby generators and welding power sources. And then during Y2K, they couldn't build generators fast enough. Everybody needed and as long as I'm going to buy a generator, it might as well be a welder too. And I remember the pickup truck, as soon as we'd get one of them wire pallet containers full of enough header or enough twin cylinder mufflers for these generators, I was driving the truck to Miller to deliver them, to keep them on, keep them running so that they could ship enough of them. And so we had other little companies that we did work for besides just Mercury and the marine headers.
So you get your big paycheck that drops in the bank, and now did they? I'm sure they probably kept you on. Were you working, or just as a consultant, or?
It started out. They got the financials and stuff, and the guy calls up. Wants to meet with me and maybe go out to supper. And okay, we're there, and just the two of us at this restaurant, and he pulls out this offer sheet, and we're at some Mexican restaurant, and sitting there eating, and he hands me this thing, and I look at it. I'm trying to keep a poker face, I'm like looking at it. I almost choked. And I'm like, wow. And it looks good, and set it down, and we're talking and more small talk and stuff. And I said, well, I'll run that in front of some of the people that I got, and that. And it's dark out, and I get home, and my wife's gone with the kids yet. We had two daughters that were still in grade school, I think, then at the time, or junior high. And she gets home, and she sees me out sitting on the back deck at the house, and she goes, what's going on? You don't sit out here that often. I go, put the kids to bed. Come out and talk about something. And she's like, what the hell do you do now? And comes back there, and I said, here's the offer for the shop. Oh, okay. What does that mean? And I'm like, man, I don't know. I never thought this was going to, I was going to have that shop for the rest of my life. And my kids wanted to work there. They were already telling me that, well, so you got to get in engineering? Not necessarily, but I don't want you going into that, it's too dog eat dog, And things came up. They called and upped the offer the next day, and I show it to my accounting people and that, and yeah, that's a pretty good deal. And I had a 5-year contract to work for them. I made it through that. I don't know how. It was altogether different. You're living the life of Dilbert then.
Because the company was, what was it, CompX, and were they like an investment firm, or what was?
It's pretty closely held, publicly traded company, but the way I saw it, it was a couple of rich guys own little 401k. Rather than buying parts of a company, they just bought the whole companies up. And so they decided to get into the marine industry. And why would somebody do it? Oh, it's not all the peaks and valleys like other stuff, because there's always, and I'm like, yep, whatever.
You guys, you have no idea how rosy this is going to be. It's it's just like printing money, right?
Yeah. And I made it a year and a half, 2 years past my contract, which is pretty much my usual stint at any company. About 2 years, and they're showing me the door. And part of the problem, Joe, is I can't shut up, as you're probably finding out now.
Oh no, this is perfect. But you did tell me a story once, a very good boardroom story. So I hope you remember that one.
Oh, there were a lot of them, and it was hard having somebody telling you what this market would. You've kind of been living boats your whole damn life, and here comes some guy in there. Oh, I don't think that would sell, and this wouldn't do. We should do this instead. And I'm looking, okay, whatever.
I was smart enough 5 years ago when you wrote me the check. I was brilliant, but now I'm dumb.
Yeah, and you're looking at it, and what's running in my mind is what's going to make this header or exhaust better, and what's the next step in this game, and what else could we build that you could instantly sell for, and it was just changing goals all through the company's history. It was race boats, it was pleasure boats. We got to get into Mercury. So you just constantly have these stepping stones to all this stuff. That the race boat thing, I think one time at Key West, we used to run the ads in Powerboat with the previous month's race results. And in Superboat and Open class, which were real race classes then, you had Mercury and Sterling and Eichert and all them guys competing with these engines that had unlimited RPM and just limited by 500 cubic inch in open class, and turn them as far as you dare thought you could and just put the best parts in them. And these guys were trying everything for 5-10 horsepower because those boats were so dialed in that little changes just had a big effect on your lap times. And that was the big thing for us. For so long, you're thinking about that. And then it's production stuff. And then it's military stuff. We got into a lot of the titanium and started bending the titanium for some of these exhausts. And we did Inconel exhausts for another just complete header built out of Inco 625. Hard to work with, hard to bend, welds like butter. It's almost pure nickel. And just so many different stories that all contributed to it. And here you are, all of a sudden you're taking orders from some people that's one of the things that kind of drives you almost to do it again, to start this over again. But I'm 69 now. And that last bender, when I bought it, came from Japan, a MIC bender. That thing was over $900,000 to buy it, and it cost probably more than that, almost double, to tool it. And we bought tools from other companies and had them made, and that wasn't working out. We had to buy a machine shop then, or equip a machine shop and get your own in on staff people to design this stuff and make your own tooling, and just so much that builds up to it that you never saw that total where this company is going to come in and write a check and then fire you. But when they did that day, I said, I could still kiss you on the lips for what you did to me.
That's okay. So I'm going to prompt you here. Remember the story you told me was something about a guy said something. He was complaining. It was a boardroom meeting, complaining about something. And then you said, there's enough money in the suits in here or something like that.
Oh, yeah, the meeting was going on. We had meetings. You just have a meeting about everything. And
a meeting about the meeting, right?
There couldn't be an empty seat at this great big table. You had to get all these people in, and everybody's got to come up with their cost-cutting methods for what could happen out in the shop. And it's some inane crap, and I'm listening to this going, oh, man, no, we got to have a meeting over this, and somebody's going to clean out the stock room because we've got too many number 2 pencils or some damn thing, and you got to take all this shit seriously. And it comes up to me, and how would you cut? And I said, let's do an accounting of this damn meeting with everybody's fully burdened cost with all the overhead and all their benefits and everything, and see what this meeting costs. And I could just sense the anger, and I thought, okay, mission accomplished,
So what was the last straw?
I think there were a lot of short straws. If you could equate it to something, I'm more of I'm guessing a racer in a small shop. They asked me one time, they built this 100,000 square foot building for me.
Wow.
Gave me an office in the corner with no windows towards the offices, but a big window on the shop. And he goes, you just don't seem happy with this place. What could we do here? And I see that space, that big empty space there? Build me a 3-car garage there and put a door on it and don't let anybody in. And I might have a phone in there, but I get to pull people in there when I want them and then get rid of them when I don't want them. And every once in a while, I'll throw something out the door and you guys can build it if you want it. And he looked at me like, oh, what the hell is this guy talking about? But Joe, I was serious.
Oh, and that's where you brought the value. That's how you built the company.
It's exactly it. I was out in the shop. I had to, when you couldn't get a welder to come in, I had to learn how to do that. And this was pretty particular. We used to laugh at some of the guys that used to come in and weld for us. Say, a monkey could do that. It was all this walking the cup, TIG stainless, really precise stuff, where you kind of lay the rod in and walk the torch over it. And the purge gases and all this stuff. And, I just had to learn how to do it. And I think I'm too shaky now to do it, or if you don't use it, you lose it kind of a thing. But it's the shop mentality. It's not the big corporate, let's all get together in this big room and have a soda and talk about what we're going to do, not actually do it, and it was different. There was something going on every day at the shop. Somebody flying in to count something and walking around with a clipboard and a stopwatch or a calculator. And I'm like, oh, now what? And one time it was this whole great big rack. The bigger the shop got for me, the more I could have stuff in stock that when I wanted to prototype something, I had every size of something. And that was just the coolest thing for me before I sold this company. You'd go to one of the metal suppliers' catalogs, and I just wanted one length of every size and thickness of tubing they made. And I bought that one time. I just said, okay, this is it. I'm going to do it. And every brass fitting made it. Royal Brass was a company. It's RB Royal now, I think, if they even exist anymore. Went to their catalog once. I want every taper, every different flare size, every thread size in English and metric, and bought all of these fittings. And just when I was rigging something, I had the fitting there.
Sure.
And did the same thing, I think, with AeroQuip. And it was just, I thought I arrived when I had that kind of stuff,
Yeah, right.
I see this guy come in, one of the accountants one time rolls out this great big rack with all this tubing in it. And I go out there, what's going on with this? Oh, we're going to scrap all this because it's not used on the spreadsheet. I said, that's what I do all the prototyping with. Whenever I want to build something, I've got the right size of something that I need. Well, you can just order it new. Yeah, you don't get it. That's a couple of weeks. When I want to build something, I want to do it that day.
Right.
Not in 2 weeks. Doesn't matter. It's got to go. And I got mad at first. And I go, how much? And he looks at that. I'll sell it to you for $600 with the rack. Sold.
Yeah. Wow.
My trailer, they don't believe it. I'm still living off of that. I wonder what else they've thrown out since then.
Oh God. Yeah. Now, how was it? Because, you sold the company. It looks like you sold it in like 2005. Does that sound right?
Could be. Yeah.
Okay. And I do remember now that I saw that, I do remember that it was a very opportune time for you to sell, obviously, because it wasn't a couple years later that the economy really took a shit.
Yeah.
And because then, of course, we're going, you guys are freaking crazy, right, to buy this thing at this point. But how was that for you? Did you like, I don't know, did you feel guilty? Were they like looking at you like, hey, you're like, I didn't see this coming, right?
At first, when that check cashed, we were building the 525 headers for Mercury at the time at about 50 sets a week. It ran between 40 and 50, but we couldn't, at that, we were having trouble keeping up, meaning they're shipping that damn many motors. That was a popular engine.
Wow.
And that includes the 600 and some of the other ones, but the 525 was like the that was it for a while. And then on top of that, we had all the tailpipe jobs from all the different manufacturers to make them fit in the boat. Then we had the taller headers or the leaned out ones or the leaned in ones. So you put it all together, and it was still going pretty good. And all of a sudden, there's just a slowdown. And what's going on? And Mercury says, we just aren't moving anything. And that was when that recession hit. And it went down to maybe 20, 30 engines a month.
Wow.
From doing over that a week. And it required layoffs and stuff. And what are we going to do? And I said, this has happened before. It'll come back through this. And it was just the first 1350 that they made. Way before that, it was called Quadzilla. They put together a 4-turbo thing that they put a pair of them in a cigarette boat, and we're going to set the speed record, but the boat was so squirrely. It showed up at the Miami Boat Show once, and then it came apart, and they sold it in different pieces. But there's still pictures on the internet somewhere with Fred standing down in the dyno cell in front of this big engine with all kinds of cables and wires going to it, measuring everything. And then the 1350, they decided to turn that into that turbo engine. And we did the first couple of test exhausts for it. And when you're sitting around this big boardroom, Mercury would just have you build that. And they go, after they had it for a while, they have this big meeting with everybody with khakis come to the office, like that. And you're sitting in, what should we charge for this? They go around and accountants and stuff. And, oh, yeah, we can do this and that, and get to me, give it to them. And I said, that's usually the way I did it. But then let's work closely with them, be around for every little change on that motor, and be so intimate with it that you know it inside and out, and start working your cost so that we could build that for them. We can't give it to them. And they went by, if you ever dig up sometime a YouTube video of Danny DeVito in Taxi, and they call it Negotiations. And he got some story in the Taxi series where he got hit by, what's the guy's, Christopher, whatever, the guy that played one of the drivers of the Taxi.
Is it Christopher Lloyd? Was it Christopher Lloyd, the kind of crazy guy?
Yeah. His dad ran into Danny DeVito or something and hurt him. And then Danny's trying to figure out how much he could get out of his dad, and he's going back and forth. I could go this high, but if I went over that, then he won't give me anything. I could get up to here, and he goes back and forth, and he's really struggling with this personally. This is what that meeting, once they started trying to decide how much to charge Mercury for that set of prototype exhaust, and I'm like, Joe, you are so out of here. This isn't you anymore. It's over, And sure enough, oh yeah, they paid it. They probably grumbled about it in a meeting over there, but now everything's aluminum. And they're having, one of my last jobs there was before one of the Miami boat shows. I said, we've got enough prototype stuff here that we did for Mercury. Let's build a set of full stainless exhausts for the 1350. And what information we don't have, let's just guess on. And we put that together and put that up at the show. And everybody was kind of interested, and we don't know you did that, Well, it was empty. There weren't insides.
Right. That's how you would get the talk starting, right?
Right.
Interest going.
And they ended up, because that engine, running them in some of those boats that they run them in, it's coming out of the water, and it just had to be without water for just a little while, running that wide open, and it blew the sides of that aluminum exhaust out. And they sold a fair amount of them, but never really went into it to the point where you'd go through all the cost reduction. And what if we did this way? And what if they built it the same way as we put together that one set for the show, and never thought about it in the way that, it's a different way that exhaust is put together, and you have to think of a different way to do it. And that's just the clock running.
Right.
You're not going to be able to charge them whatever, $25,000 a set or whatever from there on out. And it's a different way of running the company. And then they're more, and there's no right or wrong to it. They're more, you have a print for something that you're using, we'll quote it to that print. My shop was always, nobody's building that. Let's build that. And then we'll draw our own prints and go, what will the market bear on this thing, on this product, whatever. Yeah. And just two different philosophies on how to come at a business.
Yep. I think, the world knows that the automotive aftermarket the last few years has been crazy consolidation, and it's going the other way now. So it's how the world goes around in that thing. So, hey, you said something that made me think of something. So in the heyday, right? When the super boats are around that 500-inch limit, and they're all trying to get that last 10 horsepower. Things were these guys like Annabelle and Eichert? Were they all probably coming to you with their own designs or their little tricks? And how did you protect that against sharing?
There was this saying. We were running the stock cars, and we were running like Artco and ASA. You're probably not that familiar with some of them series. And if you'd have a guy, some real hot shoe driver, and he'd win for a little while, everybody'd be looking at your car. And this went on through the boat racing stuff. I'm not a smoky unit kind of a guy doing this kind of stuff, but when the rule books came out, that was like field day. You get a couple of cases of beer and you sit around with the guys and you read that rule book over. You got a good group and you're sitting there and you're going through this and you're having another beer and maybe a shot here and there and just going on and on and on. By the end of that night or early that morning, you had that kind of figured out on what you were going to try the next day. But anyway, with that, they had something that we used to joke about is if you start setting fast times, you put a little yellow dot on your dashboard. And if people started showing up with that yellow dot on the car, you knew that they were coming after you. And we did this stuff with one of the stock cars once. We got it real early for us. Usually it's at the end of just before the season starts, and you've got the time to just put this whole car together, paint it, and get it to the track. This one time we had the new chassis sitting there before Christmas break, and we're all sitting around with the new rule book, and we start cutting parts of the frame out and moving stuff around. Now, what didn't they say in the rule book? People say it's cheating. I never saw it as that. And you change so many things on it that should be visible, but then you do a couple of obvious things that people catch, and then this is what's doing it. And they don't know what's going on deep inside of it. The boats were the same thing. Remember that Zubaz boat that ran in C class? It was a Sutphen staggered boat, I think 6s, and it probably started out with 5s or something. And some of those stock or modified classes, you could get away with stuff. And I remember Rick Lamore calling me, and he was, you're limited to a 15.5-inch primary, but it says nothing about a secondary. So we were coming up with ways to divide the elbow up around the bend down into the tailpipes and stuff, and make it so that you can take the elbow off. And if you looked out, you wouldn't see separation in there. And did all that kind of stuff. And we did a D skater the same way. And just they'd go out and win. By the time people would catch you on that and say, well, that's not the intent. Well, okay, change the intent then. And by that time, you had that boat so dialed in with propellers and setups that you could probably take 20, 30, 40 horsepower out of it and still win.
Yeah.
And it was the same way with the cars, and it was the same way with those boats. You'd get a call from, it'd be either Keith Eichert or Mike D'Annabelle, and, I want to do this, and this is my deal, and yeah, okay. And Mike Mike was pretty sharp with this at open class for a while. That was so limited, and he had some hot running stuff, and it was all the victory team stuff, and even in Superboat where you could put the big superchargers on it and that stuff. There was still we did what do they call them? They've got a lot of names for them. A big 42 Apache once was a race boat, and we re-rigged it at our shop when we used to get into all of that stuff. And we did it right from scratch, pulled all the wiring out, all the engines, drives, had a new transom put in it, and started from scratch and started laying lines across the chimes and each strake all the way down, and everything's going in a different direction, and you got to pick it's long before they ever did a CNC plug for a fiberglass mold.
So nothing straight.
Yeah, put this boat together, put the engines in. They had some 1,200 horse engines from a engine shop that's going to remain nameless, and we messed with them and couldn't get things out. The speedometers were before GPS ones, so the speedometer was modified in the back to make it look like it's going faster than it really was. It was rigged at another shop down in South Florida that'll go nameless right now. And we had a radar gun to test it, and this thing was a slug, and it's just not making horsepower. It's not pulling these props that it should. And call the owner of this boat. He wants it ready for this race. Okay, go down to Mercury, pick up 2 of those new 1000s, the 1000 SC race engines. They're sitting there waiting for you. Oh, cool. This was one of them jobs that's almost like going down to Lake X and getting a choice of the keys. You got this 42 Apache at your shop, and VP race fuel, and dumping it in 55-gallon drums at a time, filling this thing up, put those new engines in, get everything set, take it out, do whatever break-in Mercury wanted for it. And the lake out here was pretty rough. This thing cooks up pretty good once in a while, and going around, and we got it up to about 104 and just completely blew out those 1,200 horse engines. And I thought, this is cool. This is cool stuff. You got to do this for a living, Didn't forget about all the hundreds of hours that you got into this boat. Right. Guy, but
Awesome.
Race boat stuff was.
Yeah. So you think Eichert and Danabel, those are probably the 2 guys that were probably the
Mercury.
Kind of the cream of crop.
There.
The Mercury too.
The 3 of them, I think, for open class.
Now Danabel's still doing it, right? He's still building.
Kind of. I think he sold the place once. I didn't touch. I got to get back a hold of him.
I think he bought it back or got back into it somehow. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he bought back into it. He might be out of it again, because during that recession thing, he bought a bunch of test equipment that the big 3 were getting rid of, and got into all the certification for different automotive systems. And I think he was pretty happy with that. I hope I'm not stepping out of time talking about what he was doing, but he was pretty happy with some of the decisions that he made.
Yeah. Now, one of the amazing things you guys did, and they're still doing it, was just works of art, was the custom tailpipes. I mean, when you got staggered engines or you got triples, and it was amazing when we were doing business with you, because you had a great little drawing sheet, and we would do the drawings, and you guys would hit those things. And but I mean, man, there's some really elaborate stuff. What's kind of the most elaborate one you think you ever did?
There's one that I've saved the picture in my phone. There was a fountain staggered. I don't know the length of the boat. I'm guessing a 38, maybe a 36 race boat, where the front engine pipes come out the side of the boat and the rear engine ones go out the back. And I've got so many pictures. Every time on the internet I see some old CMI picture, header picture, or engine picture, that's really complicated. The old Dirty Laundry race boat, the 4-engine one, we redid that once, and that was measure, pictures, and I think it went in. pretty good. It looks pretty nice, and I don't know where that boat is now, but I think that was a Couve CUV made in Italy at the time, and that was a fast running boat. We never did any of the Copeland stuff. That was kind of at the tail end. At the start of CMI, I look at some of those late 80s pictures from down at the dock in Key West, and I can pick out the boats. I look for myself standing there somewhere, but I pick out the pictures of the boats that had our stuff on it. I always remember, I couldn't quite get into this one. It's like that thing that we started way at the beginning of this, that point in time where somebody later in their careers, like Bill Saroy from Copeland's group, or Don Pruitt. A lot of these names, for a California guy, you're not going to know who some of them are.
Saroy, I know, recognize Saroy.
Don Pruitt, one time, when I was working for Kiekhaefer, I was down there putting some mufflers on a boat, on a Chris Cat. He worked for Chris Craft at the time. He used to drive boats for Mercury, I think, in offshore way in the day, and then tunnel boats he even did. And I got to know him, and then I was at Innovation one time. I think for a couple of years, I spent my years down at Innovation working on Navy stuff. I think I flew down there every week, if not twice a week, for different things. But Chris Craft was right there at the time, and I remember being there for something else, and Pruitt says, "Oh, come into my office, and here's this old racer that you just know now working for Chris Craft." And he goes, "Here," and he hands me his helmet and his life jacket. He goes, "I'm not going to be using this anymore." And I'm like, wow, this really means something. This is a big thing for this guy to give that stuff up, and I wish I still had it. Somebody stole it from me. But that's like Sherlock at Lake X. This is the same guy that still holds APBA records for outboard races and stuff, and kilo runs. They used to run the kilos down at Kaukauna, a city near here, and I used to go there even when I was younger and just watch all these guys race these things. Sometimes you sit there for hours before somebody'd get out there again and make another run, but there was always something neat going on every spring down there where they were running. A lot of records set.
Yeah.
Back when 100 miles an hour still meant something.
Right.
A pontoon boat going 100.
Yeah. I sold powerboats. I just ran across the other day, and every month they would have a page and would say the new members of the 100-mile-an-hour club.
Yeah, wasn't that something? I remember I was working at Kiekhaefer when Velocity got their outboard powered 22-footer to go 100, and that was a big deal. And I had some shirts that they sent up to us for it, and 100 miles an hour used to be a accomplishment.
Yeah. Now your bass boat does 100, right?
Yeah. Just to get there a little bit faster to that fishing stuff.
Yeah. No, obviously, man, you've been so blessed because you had a company, which is just iconic. And I think if you go back now, probably, and look through history, I mean, CMI's got to be one of the top 5 to 10 high performance, companies that have ever existed. When you give the longevity, the impact, and the fact that, I mean, I don't know for how many years it's the only game in town. Like it's the only place you're going to go buy a set of stainless headers. So
I counted it one time when we started up, and this would have been in the early 90s, late 80s. There were 14 exhaust manufacturers, being Stellings, Patterson, Gill, all these companies. There were 14 of them that were in there, and it's all these little changes that we talked about, where we finally built enough headers to buy a mill run of tubing, and we can switch from distributors to the actual factories that are making the tubing, and different little changes and contracts that you got, and you're checking off. This was on a big whiteboard in my office, along with the whole timeline of headers and how much they cost down at the bottom of it, but other manufacturers, and then you just put a cross through them when they went away. But so much of it, Joe, was when the owners or the or the guys that originally were part of the company are gone, and you can just see the demise start already of it. I remember Gilmarine being up for sale when I think his daughter Connie ran it for a while, and I don't know who else was in there, and then eventually they sold it, and some private equity place. I remember Jim Browning that owned Corsa.
Mm-hmm.
Being in my booth at the Miami show saying, hey, why don't you buy this company of mine? And then, when he was looking to get out, I think he was sick then, and it's all sad stuff. But eventually, the only two exhaust manufacturers that were still in of them 14 was Tubistyle in Italy that was doing the Lamborghini stuff, and Stellings. And then Stellings closed it. Jack Davidson, I think he just closed it. I think the Sanger thing he did for a little while after that. And I've had people copy just beautiful copies of that Mercury sweeper style header, and you'd see it at one of the boat shows or something, or they'd try to start selling it, and you'd talk to the principals at the company, and he goes, man, I can't make this for what you're selling it for. And I said, yeah, that takes a while to get there, but
yeah,
it could be, just it's that drive that put you there that isn't taking somebody else's drawing and, okay, I can chisel a little bit more percentages out of this.
Right. Well, and you guys, your drive to build more, faster, whatever, but also to get better, always looking to improve, and that comes in little tiny pieces. Like you said, you just chip away at it. So the guy that starts from scratch is not going to be able to do that, and you've got 100 years of figuring. Like, I already figured that one out, and this guy's still trying to figure it out, right? So you just chip away and move forward. You're just always moving forward.
The way you brought it up before, like these downturns in the industry, so many of them happen. And with like CMI, we started out doing, it was like when all business, what are they, the little plaques that you see hanging on the wall, or the frame things with the mission statement. And I was in this business group, and everybody had to work on their mission statement. What was your company mission statement going to be? And I sat there and gets, Joe, what's your mission statement for CMI? Anything for $1. They go, seriously? I said, yeah, seriously. And that's the truth. You start off and you have this plan that you think you're going for, and you've got to be able to take 180-degree variations from that all the time. You want this production work, but to get there, everybody else had the production work. Gill had the production work. Stellings had the production work with that Merc 575 and that. You had to take the replacement stuff. You had to make the tops or the tailpipes for their stuff. You had to do all that stuff. You had to go after the race boats. And I don't know how many different meeting rooms for marine companies you hear. We got to go after the high-end stuff, after the cigarettes, the outer limits, all them kind of things. We need that stuff because they're always selling stuff. Well, man, I got to know Paul Fiore really well when we were displaying at the Miami Boat Show. And I remember Mikey as a little kid running around the booth because it used to be so dead in them shows. Sometimes Paul and I would sit and talk for hours, about different stuff, boats, cars, whatever, business. Got to know Mikey as he was growing up. And it's just some sad stuff now when you think about it. But you had to take every bit of work you could get and be everything to everybody. Now I look at some of these patents that I'm sitting on, and it'd be pretty easy to do it the opposite way and pick out the money-making stuff and just go after that. Let them have all that stuff that you need, all this tooling for, all this different capabilities for, but go after a piece here and a piece there. And that's what kind of gets me now sometimes. Should I do this? And it'd be, I can make this so much cheaper than I used to, or or make it better. I think serviceability on a header, you can't take. I don't know what they get for a set of sweepers from Mercury Marine now to replace them on a 525, but they're at that age now where they've all been replaced a couple of times, and they're not selling any other motors, but the price of all this offshore stuff is sky high yet. And go to look for a used Merc 525, and there's just not a lot available. And their next engine is that 565, that naturally aspirated motor, but a Bravo is still, I think you bolt the stuff together and already the gears are shitting out the side of them. It's just terrible. I had that 38 Fountain. I grew up on this stuff, running through the waves and stuff, and I want to get that boat of my own. I sold the company and bought that 38. I had new XRs on the thing. I knew guys at Stillwater and at Fond du Lac that had every trick on how to rebuild them and how to shim the gears, and we were doing everything we could to them. And I had a spare set of XRs in the attic at my shop, and I bought every bearing, gear, shaft, and everything, and 2 pair had it sitting on the shelf so I could keep this thing running. And I'm running through this stuff, and everybody, well, you don't know how to drive, you don't know how to do this. I bought it to make it look like I was running at Key West, and that poor little drive just wasn't made for that. And I thought, okay, I'm going to sell this and get something with 6s. And I just had a buddy lock up a 6 and blow it apart. And I'm looking at it and I see his bill for the price on it.
Oh, I can't even imagine.
And he was in 35 grand before he had any labor in it. And I'm like, holy cow, you got to have a lot of fun for $35,000, and that's after you already own the boat and pay the insurance and the fuel bill. And yeah, okay.
Well,
I don't know. It just changes, and this industry. There's a lot there. The outboard. You pull a cover off of one of them big things, and I just bought a V10 400 here, and I look at that, and I see pieces of the philosophy that I got to know working with Mercury so long, as far as how the cooling system is running and how the water pumps are hooked up and that stuff. And I go, man, they still haven't changed that. More little water poppet valves and stuff like that. And maybe they live forever on an outboard, but they sure never did on stern drives, and everything, all that plastic seems to come apart. I don't know why. They can say it's as strong as it ever is, but you look at how many of those little plastic fillers on the bottom of a manifold that Mercury had to replace, and things like that. And I'm like, yeah, they still do that. And
crazy.
Different standing back and looking at it now and going, yeah, I still want to. I want to pull that manifold off of that.
Well, they say you keep your brain working is how to keep it healthy, and so obviously yours is going to be healthy for a long time. And way to prove your second grade teacher wrong all these years.
Yeah, when I graduated college, that one probably did it. I ran into my high school guidance counselor, the one that said, "You're lucky your dad's got a plumbing business." I saw him one time. I was standing up I was in the rehearsal dinner for my brother's wedding, and he was sitting at the bar. I think he spent a lot of time at that bar, probably too much. But what the hell? He's still plumbing? Like if plumbing is a bad thing,
I was gonna say, when he said, "Yeah, wow, you're lucky your dad has a plumbing company." You're like, "Yeah, I'm really lucky," because that's a great way to make a living. Obviously, you learned a lot from that.
It was don't buy the stuff, build it kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And when we built a house, the only thing we didn't do on the house was the cement poured walls. We did the footings. We had it excavated, but we did everything, all the electrical, all the plumbing, all the roofing, we built the whole damn house, the 3 or 4 guys,
Mm-hmm.
and you get to know a lot of stuff doing that, but you also get bored quick, or at least I did. It was like,
but you know
we
what?
got to live.
Yeah, that's another blessing though for you, right? You get bored quick, and that helps you keep changing and moving forward, right?
Yeah, I'm glad my wife isn't hearing that. She's probably pretty bored with me.
I don't know. So, well, hey Joe, man, almost 2 hours. That's fantastic, and unfortunately, I've got to get going.
Do a lot of splicing.
Hey, and you know what? You've been you and I have had probably 10 phone conversations where I'm trying to talk you into this, and you're nervous, and you don't know what you're going to talk about. And Joe, that was just fantastic. Like that's so much great information, and I'm so glad. So many things I didn't know about you, and it was amazing. And you know what? And we need to get on and keep going, do this some more.
Yeah, it's a good ride.
You're way underestimating, man. It's a great ride, and what you did was, it's amazing building a company like you did and a product. That's the thing. Like, and again, in the 90s when we started selling them, the product was, I remember just selling against, because we were going against Stellings, and some of the Stelling stories you would tell me, I'm like, this is not the same stuff, man. It's good stuff.
You wonder what, as you're sitting in college after working a lot of different jobs, you wonder what the hell you're doing there, But after a while, I just got stubborn enough to stick it out, and I'm not going to get beat by this. That was pretty much it. All I needed was that piece of paper. And I think that's the only reason I got the job. Fred is probably still regretting the day he hired me. I ran into him at a car event once, and I walk into this wine and cheese party at Road America that I happened to get invited to. And Fred's there, and he goes, we're going to talk shop for about 5 minutes, then we're just going to go to social stuff. And he's a nice guy, but he's got to control the situation, I think, pretty much. And he's talking about the header supply, and we were kind of touch and go at that time. And he goes, we got to have this many. Can you get us another 3 sets? And going back and forth on that. And okay, we should be able to do that. Okay, grab yourself a couple of beers. Let's go out on the deck. And he goes, whole group of people around. He goes, I'm going to tell you a story about this guy here. And I remember being he worked for me for a while, and he goes, I'm going to tell you, he was there, and we were at a product meeting one time, and he tried to talk me into building headers. And I pointed across the table to him, and I said, you want to build headers? You quit and go build headers. And damned if he didn't show me he could do that. And I thought, man, that's the first nice word I had out of Fred in my whole life.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great story. Great story. So, all right, Joe. Well, thanks a million. I appreciate it. And man, I really appreciate the time. And we'll stay in touch. I'm gonna still call you in the morning and bug you just to hear you. You kept saying, you just keep calling me to bug you, and I'm like, no, I
other stories.
Yeah. Oh, that's fine. Just write them down. I always tell guys, because everybody gets up and goes, oh, I forgot to tell that. So
have a good one, Joe.
All right, Joe. Thanks again, and take care of yourself.
Thank you for listening to Powerboat Talk. If you like what you've heard, please head over to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star review. For more Powerboat Talk, follow us on Facebook or Instagram, or visit our website at powerboattalk.com.